Among people who are anti-capitalist, I think I have a little bit of a unique story as to how I got there and viewpoint. So my impression is that most people like don't necessarily haven't gotten too deep into all that stuff either direction, like theory and academic wise and everything. Whereas I was a full like propagandist, fully drank the Kool-Aid, got deep into like I am an economist basically. Like I am an economist, right? So just like credibility wise in that sense, to clarify what I mean by that is like I went to school for math and economics, ended up working for a company that was like a law firm kind of deal, like a little bit expert witnessing firm. Like we went to like court cases with like Apple versus Samsung suing each other, and we would go in and I would make the reports for this. My boss would go in with the actual person who walks in, but I would make a report that like talks about why Samsung owes Apple this much money. It was like a whole economic reasoning story, right? So I was an economist, okay? Job title economist. And to get to the point of being full on like economics is BS, I love to say it's astrology for assholes or astrology for psychopaths, right? But to get to that point was a little weird journey in the sense that even my very first economics class, I actually called out the BS, but then was like tricked almost into seeing it all the way through and ended up just stuck in a place where I was like, I have nowhere to go. This is what I am now. So like what happened was in my AP economics class, right? I was listening to this stuff, and this is like a universal experience you'll hear across like economists who teach a lot of like intro class, especially like university setting, is there will usually be like one kid in the lecture hall who is probably like an engineering or a math or physics degree or something, like they really understand the math and they also just like have that kind of mechanical like understanding mind, right? And there's always someone in the class who will raise their hand and say like, that doesn't make any sense. Like even just straight up the math doesn't equal out. Like none of this, like this isn't science. This is like the lamest, most like weak conjecture that doesn't even like equal, like the two sides of the equal sign don't even equal, right? Like this is just silly. This always happens in any given Econ 101 class in college, is someone will have that thought, maybe multiple people, like someone will actually raise their hand, engineer type student, whatever, right? I that happened to me in AP economics in high school. And I said to the teacher in front of everyone, I was like, that's not true. That doesn't work. Like none of that makes any sense for this, and this reason. And the response I got in high school, my first econ class was, "Oh, Evan, you're correct. This is not the case. Like it actually is not true. But every year the economics classes, they tear everything down and build you up a new, better theory. So it gets better every year until you reach the actual end and there's like conflicting theories, but like they're all much better, right? Is what I was told. And I was super into this whole like, how do humans structure themselves? How do we organize society? All this stuff. I was considering poli-sci. I was a psychology major for a while, like almost finished it, right? Like I was very into how people think and do, and I thought economics was that route to get there, right? I was under the impression that I could learn how and why and should and whatnot people do and act and believe through economics. And so I thought, oh, okay, they're just teaching us like a dumbed down, simplified version of the theory. I'll get it. It'll be better next year and the year after that. Every single year, I was told again, like, oh, this isn't the final one. Like, yes, it's not working because it's like this is just the intermediate course in college, whatever it is. Eventually, still in like undergraduate or college, right? I get to the final course. We had a very like unusual class, which was using the same textbook that any Harvard whatever graduate level PhD equivalent class would use. Same exact textbook. We were graded a bit more easily, of course, but I had like a class that was the final thing. A couple of them, like one in particular, right? That was the final thing. And even then, I was like, none of this. What? No. And what was actually happening during this final, like only like 4 kids in the class, like overachievers type deal, right? Class is my professor was a bit of an unusual economist, right? I went to like a partyish school, right? It's not like a top tier or anything. And he, like academic wise, what he published paper wise, should have been teaching at like a very impressive school, but was not because his subdiscipline was a subdiscipline that was like frowned upon, like because it basically went against the common grain, right? Went against the grain. And so during this class with like this legit like end of the road, this is economics now, you are like an economist at this point, if you're learning this class now, textbook, every single week with each new textbook chapter, he would give us an optional reading, right? And in that optional reading was a paper from some sub-discipline of like poli-sci or something or other, sometimes economics, that just disproved the entire chapter. There was like, this is why the core assumptions of this whole lesson don't make any sense at all. Nothing at all, right? And like what you effectively learn if you have the vaguest bit of self-awareness in those classes is you look at it and go, oh, an economist's definition of like the fundamental unit of economics, aka a person, like an economist's definition of a person, right, is somebody who is infinitely greedy, like infinitely like insatiable desires, and infinitely knowledgeable, like perfectly knowledgeable, like a know-it-all, like knows everything. That is literally the mathematical definition of the base unit of like economic theory, microeconomics theory, right? Which makes no sense. And that was like so confusing to me as to how we thought it made sense. Like there's behavioral economics, there's other like fields, like subfields that like change that a little bit, but like for the most part, like that is the consensus. That's how people like think in that field. And that didn't make any sense to me as to why that would be the case until I heard a few different things, right? A few different like theories and historical like quirks, right? First up is what's called physics envy. There is just this huge trend, or has been for decades, this huge trend of people who couldn't cut it in math degrees, physics, engineering, whatever, going into economics. And what happens is they start to over-mathematize the discipline to make themselves feel better. It's like a guy getting a truck that's like huge and like lifted and all this stuff. He's overcompensating for something, basically, right? They're overcompensating for their lack of math and the fact that like economics is not a hard science. It's not a mathematical science. It's a social science. They're overcompensating for their insecurity there. Beyond that, even more interestingly, right, is when psychologists take personality assessments of incoming economics majors, like freshman economics major, right? When they take personality assessments, they say, oh, like what are the personality traits? What are all the psychometric whatever traits, right? You know what a major comes out as borderline psychopathic? Like on average, they are more selfish, less empathetic, et cetera, psychopath traits. Economics, right? Interestingly, the major that's worst at math, education. Think about that for a second. Anyways, though, you have this group of people going into this major that are like the psychopathic end of our population in general, of all the college students. And you have this weird physics envy thing happening where they're just like, they couldn't cut it in like a serious hard science, right? And then a lot of like, plus like a bunch of like historical Cold War type like propaganda incentives from decades ago and everything. And you get to the point where you have this entire academic discipline that is what I've now been calling for years astrology for assholes. That's an alliteration, so I prefer it, but like more accurate term, astrology for psychopaths, right? Is what economics effectively is. And it's just such a shame to see a system with that much, like an ideology effectively with that much power, like an ideology that's so insane, have that much power. But anyways, that's how I got as like time moved on, I kind of drifted away from this and realized what was happening and like broke myself off of it, thanks to some help of friends as well and everything. But that's like my a bit unusual background in becoming like a very doesn't like capitalism style person, like despite the fact that I had that background of working in like at a high level as an economist at like for like well paid like for big tech companies and things. But because of that weird background, I actually have a lot of insights, I feel like, that don't get talked about in like anti-capitalist type circles and sides of TikTok and everything that I would like to share here on my TikTok page. A lot of like basic assumptions of simple economic concepts that like when you play them out don't make sense, that I just don't ever see or hear being talked about, that I'm going to drop in some future videos.